Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first session of Worldmaking between Prometheanism and Perspectivism. The goal of the seminar is to treat the question of planetary design at the often polemical intersection of two contemporary streams of thoughts. On one side, perspectivism, cosmopolitics, and the ontological turn, and on the other, Prometheanism, neorationalism, and left-accelerationism. This is structured on the basis of Eduardo Viveiros de Castro's EVC text on the models and examples, Bricoleurs, and engineering of Anthropocene, where he articulates a critique of geoengineering through the Levi-Straussian distinction between bricoleurs, who work with examples, and engineers, who work with models. Drawing from tensions within EVC on text, we would like to avoid a simple opposition to engineer, as the use of models for, and explore the possibility of thinking of bricoleurs, examples, and engineers, models, as vectors within a spectrum. We will bring in the concept of diagram as one which might serve to mediate between models and examples. Both of those would then appear not as extreme cases of more or less coded diagrams. Our goal will be, on one hand, to distance ourselves from a mere rejection of engineer and technology in the navigating of climate catastrophe, while on the other, dissolving the stark position between Promethean planetary engineer and supposedly localist perspectivist cosmopolitics. This should allow us to learn something from the perspectivism term critique of geoengineering and the Promethean elaboration of planetary scale world making. We will explore mixed concepts, such as Viveiros de Castro's concept of geobricolage, or perhaps even a perspectivist take on geoengineering via the notion of a bricolage engineer in spectrum, which is to say an example model spectrum mediated by the notion of diagram. Our instructor is José Antônio Magalhães. Is a theorist, researcher, and teacher. He is currently a postdoctoral researcher at PUC-Rio and holds a PhD in legal theory from the same institution. José has courses on educational and research platforms such as UBU, em curso, Associação de Pesquisa e Práticas em Humanidades, Instituto Norberto Bobbio, and Pinacoteca de São Paulo. Zé, it's on you.
Thanks, Savi. Hi, everyone. I'm going to begin by, well, first of all, thanks to the new center for having me here. I'm really honored to be giving a first seminar here. Thanks to Mo Salemi and Thomas Moynihan, the programmer of this program, of the Worldmaking program. Thanks also to Rafael, Savi, and Mstislav for setting all of this up. And thanks for everyone who's here, who has decided to watch this. I'm very glad you found this interesting. I'm going to start by going through some notes that I prepared so that I can be very objective and go through as much stuff as possible in little time, because as you know, in this first session, we're going to try to save enough time at the end so that everyone can talk a little bit about themselves and we can have this conversation. I'm going to go through some notes that I made, and then I also have a small slide presentation that is going to help us go through some passages of the basic text that we had for today. I don't know how many of you have managed to read it, considering that this is the first session. So, and since there's also no presentation for this session from you guys, I'm going to also use the slideshow to go through some passages of that text, because it's going to structure the whole seminar. So in this session, I will seek to introduce these two conceptual characters that are going to structure our investigation through their contrasting approaches to this same problem, which is a problem of world making in times of technological acceleration and ecological catastrophe. Why do I speak of conceptual characters? You know, I want to emphasize this because I know that both Prometheans and perspectivists are going to get mad at me because, you know, I'm simplifying their positions and being unfair in various ways, especially at this first session when we are going to be just, you know, starting to introduce these characters. Most of all, everyone is certainly going to say that there's, you know, a diversity of nuanced positions that I'm dumbing down by just talking about perspectivists or Prometheans or Terrans or Inhumans in this general way. So I want to emphasize that I want to introduce these conceptual characters which don't actually correspond to any thinker or any particular group as a kind of heuristic to navigate those different possibilities of world-making practices, okay? So they're going to be knowingly caricatures of the positions that they refer to, and then on the basis of those characters, we're going to be adding nuance and adding grain to our pictures of those characters. So there's an aspect of theory fiction included in this, which I think can be interesting. You know, we can try sometimes not necessarily just having arguments about concepts, but also trying to imagine scenarios and narratives involving those characters. You know, be speculative, not just in the philosophical sense, but also in the fictional sense. And I encourage you to draw from those different elements, especially knowing that a lot of people are not necessarily that philosophically minded. Some people are more artistic or art practitioners and stuff like that. And I think they will have something interesting to add on that basis. Okay. So that being said, we are going to call one of these groups, one of these collective characters, by names such as left-accelerationists, Inhumans, and Prometheans. Prometheans are known for rehabilitating Enlightenment ideals of reason and progress in the context of an intellectual left that seemed to have distanced itself from such ideas. They affirm the importance of technological development and large-scale political projects, and they show special interest in themes such as artificial intelligence, planetary governance, and geoengineering. The other group or character, which we may call deceleracionists or Terrans or perspectivists, also react to the limits of postmodern deconstruction of Western thought and practices, but not by seeking to rehabilitate a certain version of modernity, but rather looking speculatively outside of modernity and even of humanity, looking for non-modern metaphysics, ecologies of non-humans, among which modern technologies are, of course, included, but don't tend to play such an important role and may even be seen with suspicion in the sense that certain technologies might express or carry with themselves some kind of coagulation of some modern ideology that they might be critical of. So you may be more familiar with the first group, as the new center can be considered, I think, one of the main institutional structures associated with Prometheanism. It's an intellectual movement that is interestingly characterized by this strong para-academic character. So figures like Ray Brazier, the xenofeminist collective Laboria Cubonics, Benjamin Bratton, Nick Cernicek, Pete Wolfendale, and J.P. Cajon have all offered seminars here. And of course, Reza Negarestani has been the head philosopher here from the beginning and offered a number of seminars that have advanced his thought. And being a part of this story is, again, a big honor to me. The other tendency, whether we think of it in terms of perspectivism or ontological turn or ecological thought and so on, includes figures which you may also know, such as Bruno Latour, Isabelle Sengers, Donna Haraway, Annette Singh, Bruce Albert, and David Kopenawa, as well as Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, who is famous precisely for the concept of perspectivism and who will be the main representative of that current for us during this seminar. We will be starting his discussion of perspectivism later on, and the basic text that structures this first session is also by him. So, and that is basically because that's the author within this larger group that I'm most familiar with, and that I can transmit with more detail, though we're going to be drawing from the other ones as well. So in Viveiros de Castro's article that was assigned as the basic reading for this session, titled On Models and Examples, Bricoleurs and Engineers in the Anthropocene, he draws on these two conceptual characters from the introduction of Levi-Strauss's Wild Thought book to discuss what he calls two contrasting forms of world making. He uses this expression, so I think that's a good way to upfront to establish the connection between this and the world making program and the question of world making as this background on which we're going to be putting into play those different approaches, right? So those two characters of bricoleurs and engineers, you're going to see how they fairly obviously are going to map onto this dualism between perspectivism and Prometheanism, or Terrans and Inhumans and so on. But I believe this discussion in this article is particularly interesting as a starting point because it introduces a further pair of concepts corresponding specifically to how those two conceptual characters approach this problem of world making, concepts of models and examples. Promethean engineers make and unmake worlds by designing and applying models. Perspectivist bricoleurs do so by giving and following examples, and we're going to try to unpack what those two practices amount to. Also, he's going to introduce those two characters in the context of not only the problem of world making, but specifically of a critique of geoengineering and a proposal of this concept of geobricolage, which is going to be interesting for us as well. So this conceptual pair of bricoleurs and engineers will be interesting, not just in order to allow us to distinguish between those two different ways of world making, but also to find ways of mediating between those two. So initially they might appear as contrasting approaches, but they're also, we're going to try to find ways to connect them. As stated in the description of the seminar, towards the second half of our course, we are going to introduce the concept of diagram, as a sort of heuristic that would be able, hopefully, to encompass both examples and models, setting them as tendencies within a continuum. So both models and examples would be diagrams. I would say types of diagrams, but types wouldn't be exactly the right word for that, I think. So why would we want to articulate those two conceptual characters and their respective modes of world making? You might have your own reasons to be interested in that, and I would very much like to hear you soon on that subject. But in any case, one central question, at least for our seminar, is this question of how to deal with the double problem of technological acceleration and climate change, and within that context, what we may call this problem of geoengineering in a broad sense. So in a broad sense, that is going to encompass not just the most immediate concept of geoengineering, but also this possibility of thinking of geoengineering between geoengineering and geobricolage. I'm calling this a double problem because those two elements, technological acceleration and ecological crisis, seem to be fundamentally entangled, but not in the sense in which they would become just one problem, because there's also the problem, the fundamental problem for our investigation of how those two elements relate to each other. That's one of the things in which we're going to have different positions. Okay, so on the one hand, it's clear that this ecological crisis we are in has been set in motion by a process that, as complex and multi-phased as it may be, has had important junctures with the Industrial Revolution and also the so-called Great Acceleration that followed the Second World War. Those events that we tend to call anthropogenic may themselves be understood, of course, as encounters between human elements, including cultural elements, concepts, normative commitments, and so on, and non-human elements, technical objects, available materials and resources, and so on. So that's one thing. And on the other hand, the same techno-economic process that has unleashed the Anthropocene also offers some of the main instruments that may make it possible to navigate it, starting from the very possibility of producing climate change as a scientific fact, of modeling its different virtualities, and consequently determining with some degree of accuracy what actions may be taken and what their most likely consequences might be. So you can see, I hope, that there's a fundamental antinomy here with practical implications, and in relation to which Prometheans and perspectivists tend to position themselves on opposite poles, right? Terrans will tend to emphasize a complicity of modernity with climate destruction, and therefore to be suspicious of neo-modernist approaches to the Anthropocene. Inhumans will emphasize the importance of science and technology and the necessity of planetary scale intervention, right? So my intention with this seminar is going to be trying to articulate with you those different extremes, so as to be able to reconcile those different preoccupations, which I think are valid, even though they might initially seem to be in conflict or contradictory. Okay. I forgot to say it, but even though I'm still going through my notes, I would encourage you to interrupt me at any point if you want to add something or ask for clarification or anything of that sort, okay? Because I'm not seeing you because I'm looking at the notes. So if you just raise your hand here, I'm not going to see it probably, but feel free to just open your mic and interrupt me at any time. Okay. So having made this quick introduction to the general theme, I would like to give you a little context in terms of where I'm coming from and why how I'm arriving here, so that you know more or less what to expect and what not to expect for me, meaning also that you might have to bring stuff in here from your own standpoint, because this is a very broad subject, of course, and extremely transdisciplinary. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's going to be nice to investigate in here together, because since the New Center seminars are always filled with people from all different kinds of backgrounds, I'm hoping that we're going to be able also to bring other tools and concepts than just the ones that I'm bringing in. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves at the end of the session, so you can already start thinking about how to do that. As a prompt, I would like you to very briefly answer one question. That's something that was suggested to me in order to make this presentation part more objective. I'm not sure it's going to make it necessarily objective, but I want you to try to, answer this question in a kind of a tweet, so that we can, we're probably not going to have as much time in this session to have discussion as in the next ones, but at the same time, your presentations can be a little bit of a discussion, a little bit of an engagement with this theme in a very broad sense. So the question that I would like to ask you to introduce yourself through answering is, where do you feel you might stand preliminarily in this cosmopolitical spectrum between perspectivists and Prometheanists, or Terrans and Inhumans, and so on? Of course, I don't mean this in order to, pin you down to one of those positions, but I think it will be interesting to see precisely whether you're going to drift in one direction or another, as well as I might during this this process. Okay, so you can start thinking about that while we go through this the slides that I'm going to present and all of that. Okay. But of course, talk a little bit about your background and your current project through that question, if you can manage to. I hope that works. So about me, I am in terms of my academic education, I can be probably described as a juridical political theorist, having done most of my academic career in law departments. I don't know how unexpected that might sound given the seminar, but my doctorate as well as the postdoc that I'm now finishing have been both at PUC Rio, Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, and my PhD has been might be described as trying to unpack the notion of the nomos of platforms that is introduced by Benjamin Bratton in his book, The Stack. So a Promethean thinker, if there's anyone, from a juridical political perspective. So he's, talking about a very juridical political concept, the concept of nomos from Carl Schmitt. And I'm unpacking that in a way that Bratton doesn't, because he is not primarily a juridical political thinker. He is an architect, design theorist. So I tried to, unpack those concepts in juridical political terms on the background also of the so-called intrusion of Gaia, so of the Anthropocene and of the climate crisis. So sort of providing a juridical conceptualization of platform normativity, algorithmic governance, as well as, tentatively how that relates to the production of artificial intelligence, but also an ecological version of the nomos of the Earth that interfaces with this cloud nomos. So you can see that this whole Promethean perspectivist interface was already there in a way. That was also when I was a student and researcher at the New Center, just like you, during the pandemic and while I was writing my thesis. So you can see that I have a strong connection to Prometheanism in that sense, though from that time I was already interfacing Promethean themes with those Terran perspectivist ideas and cosmo-metaphysical commitments that I already had. So it's not that I was, a hardcore Prometheanist and then I had, kind of perspectivist awakening and I'm coming back to revert this in some way, but rather, a continuous process of trying to interface those two different interests. Now, for my postdoc that I'm finishing now, I turned more specifically to Viveiros de Castro's perspectivism and trying to extract its juridical political consequences or transformations, and especially concerning the relation between law, territory, and ecology. With that, I have continued developing the same project, which still constitutes a kind of a very broad treatment of what we might call a speculative juridical political theory. I'm now finishing working on an article about juridical political perspectivism that if any of you are interested, I can certainly share and discuss with you as soon as I have a version of it that I can share. Also, if you want to read something by me, probably what's the most closely related to what we are discussing here is an essay that I wrote to a book that came out through the Singapore Biennale that's called Platforming and Perspectivism. I can share it with you, and also I think you can probably find it online. And I would be really happy to discuss that as well and help you if you have any questions. So my broader project, just so that you understand where I'm coming from, has 3 reference points in juridical political theory, which are Hans Kelsen, Evgeny Pachukanis, and Carl Schmitt. In that context, Kelsen and Pachukanis appear as Promethean engineers, while Schmitt, as surprising as it might seem or not, is representing the Terran Bricoleur. In case you haven't heard of them, Hans Kelsen is more of a liberal Democrat, modernist. Pachukanis is also modernist, but a communist, radical leftist kind of modernist, while Carl Schmitt is, a Nazi. So we might call him reactionary, anti-modernist. So I think this triangle in 20th century juridical political theory is also an interesting heuristic, the same kind of heuristic that I'm trying to develop here. So I hope this makes it a little clearer where I'm coming from. This is a way for me to take the basic juridical political conceptual foundations that these more traditional authors offer, and then reinterpret them through these contemporary currents of thought. In this way, I think I'm able to get some interesting results in terms of framing techno-ecological problems in juridical political terms. So I will tend to do that, I think, if whenever we need a more technically precise conceptual toolbox, because that's the one that I've developed the most. But at the same time, I want to think of this problem as something that can be interpreted from an infinite number of different disciplinary perspectives. So I might talk about it in juridical political terms, and someone else might talk about the same things in terms of art or in terms of science, or all kinds of different approaches. So it's not a question of different objects, it's a question of different approaches. And finally, to end with this part about my background, my next postdoc, which I will be starting pretty soon at ICI Berlin, has a lot to do with this specific seminar. So in a way, I'm going to be rehearsing here with you some of what I'm going to be researching and writing about for the next 2 years. So I also want to make it very clear that this is something that is not a finished product. This is something that I've always admired about the New Center seminars, that we have thinkers that are working through their ongoing research hands-on with students, rather than just transmitting some pre-established acquired knowledge or finished theory. And for a last thing before I present the slides, I want to talk about, the fact that the initial plan for this seminar, as you probably have noticed, was for there to be 2 instructors, right? I had invited my friend, Brazilian artist Luisa Grossman, to propose the seminar together, because I thought that it would be interesting not only, to have a theorist and an art practitioner, but especially to be able to have a back and forth between someone who is more fundamentally a perspectivist, but who is interested in Prometheanism, which would be me, and someone who is more fundamentally a Promethean interested in perspectivism, who would be Luisa. So it's very unfortunate that she isn't going to be able to be here. She's doing a residency in South Korea, I think, and the time zone difference would make it impossible for her to, be in a good shape for the seminar, because it would be in the middle of the night and all that. So this substitution, I want to, apologize for that in name of both of us, and say that I hope I can make up for her absence, but maybe, for those of you who are more interested in this artistic practice dimension of things, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be able to be as useful as Luisa would be. But in any case, the situation is that this has resulted in some small changes to the seminar structure, especially the 2nd and the 4th sessions that would have been led by her. I changed them a little bit to correspond to my own approaches to the themes, but I maintained the general structure of the seminar. And you don't have to worry too much, because I do have, in any case, my own approaches to those themes. As I said, this is very close to the postdoc research that I'm starting now. It's just going to be my version of it rather than this back and forth. So what changes most fundamentally is that now, instead of having this balance between 2 symmetrically positioned, instructors, you're going to be hearing about both perspectivism and Prometheanism from someone whose fundamental cosmopolitical as well as philosophical commitments tend to the perspectivist side. So someone for whom Prometheanism is very important, interesting, even admirable, but always as something with which I tend to have some fundamental differences. I hope that the fact that the new center itself may be considered as more of a Promethean institution, as I mentioned, even though there is, perspectivist elements and authors that pop up in a lot of seminars. I hope this will to some extent make up for this imbalance. After all, I feel that teaching here is also an opportunity for me to rehearse my Promethean side a little more. What I want to make clear in any cases is that even without Luisa, this seminar is not going to consist in a one-sided defense of perspectivism and critique or attack of Prometheanism. That was not what my role would be in the initial idea with her, and it's certainly not what I'm going to do now. That's not just for, you know, didactical reasons. It's simply because that's just not my attitude about those different orientations. Even though I admittedly have more of a perspectivist position, at least at this point of my life, my position is in fact so equivocal that while Prometheanists clearly know that I'm perspectivist, perspectivists often see me as a Prometheanist in disguise. So I'm going to be here to do what I've been doing for some years, which is to try and mediate between those two tendencies. So act as a kind of a cosmopolitical diplomat, which is very much a perspectivist theme. So I hope you understand where I'm coming from in that sense. So how are we going? Do you want to make any comments or ask any questions before I share the slides? Do I have permission to share the slides also? Because I think there's technical. Ete, do you want to talk, please?
Yeah, I would like to ask a question about the bibliography of the seminar, because in the center website there's I think that there's a difference in the bibliography of the second seminar, and the syllabus that is on the Google Drive has another text. In the website we have a, like, I'm just asking this just for like planning stuff, but in the website there's a text of Negarestani, and I think that in the syllabus in the Google Drive the text is not from Negarestani, it's from Ray Brescia. And I would like to know which one is the official text bibliography.
Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. I thought that the version on the
One more.
website didn't have the actual text yet, so that's why I hadn't considered this question. I mean, I did change the syllabus, as I said, after Luisa said that she wasn't going to be able to make it, precisely because I wanted to adapt it to my own approach. So basically, I thought it was better to have these texts, and I also changed a little bit. You probably noticed the descriptions of especially those two sessions, as I had mentioned. So the one that is valid now is the one that you've got, not the one on the website, the one that you got on the drive, I think, or whatever those things are made available to you. And also, so please consider the one in which that session has the Ray Brescia text, which is Prometheanism and its critics. And also, since we are talking about it, I also wanted to let you know I'm going to send it as a message afterwards also, so no one misses this. I want to change one text in particular for the last session. It's not a big change. Let me just open the syllabus here. So if you have the syllabus there, in the last session, you have the first, so where you have assigned reading and bibliography, assigned reading is the basic text that hopefully everyone's going to be able to read, if you can, of course, for each session, and which also should be presented live on the session by whoever picks it. And then bibliography is extra literature that you can read if you manage to, if you want to, and that if you pick it for your presentations, you're going to present it, you're going to make a recording of your presentation, okay? Because there's no time for everyone to present everything live. So I wanted to change in the last session, the first bibliography text, which is Deleuze and Guattari, A Thousand Plateaus, the chapter on several regimes of science. I wanted to change that to the last chapter, which is Concrete Rules and Abstract Machines. Not just because, you know, I was looking again at the On Several Regimes of Science chapter, and though it does have a lot of important discussion of the diagram, which is the concept that we're going to be looking at in that session, it also has too much of other stuff before that that I think might be distracting. And this last chapter is a very good, you know, contraction of a lot of different aspects of A Thousand Plateaus in a general sense, which includes the diagram or the abstract machine in that context. But also, I think it's going to be interesting to read that instead, because there's also a book chapter by Ray Brazier about this last chapter called Concrete Rules and Abstract Machines. So if anyone wants to also, you know, go read some of the Brazier version of it, I think it's going to be an interesting way to give a little more weight in this last session to Prometheanism, not just through Patricia Reed, who is, in my opinion, a moderate Promethean, but also through Brazier's reading of this assemblage theory that is expressed in this last chapter of Thousand Plateaus. So I hope everything is clear. If not, and in any case, I'm going to communicate that to you.
Only one question. I heard a lecture by Ray, which discussed the last plateau, but I don't know which. I didn't see the text he discussed that. Which one? What is the text in which he discusses it?
Yeah, I've seen that there's also, I think even there's like a podcast that published that lecture by him. I have heard it with his voice, but it is published as a chapter of a book that I think is called A Thousand Plateaus in Philosophy, which has one chapter corresponding to each chapter of A Thousand Plateaus. I'm going to share it with you also, so to make sure that everyone has it.
It has a purple cover, I guess. That's the one?
Yeah.
So I got that. Thank you very much.
No problem.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Sorry, all it was, is there a space for us to ask questions about the reading? I had a couple, which was mostly just filling in bits of background, but can I just put that on the Google Classroom, or hopefully it'll be probably answered here?
Yeah, so I think we might not have that much time in this session to ask questions, but certainly in the next sessions, I hope that everyone gets to ask whatever questions they have. But I also will be very happy to answer your questions either in the Google Classroom or on the Discord, or if you want to just write me an email. The Discord, I think, might be a good place to, you know, have an ongoing conversation if you guys want to do that. And if you are the kind of people who uses Discord, if you're not, you might, you know, experiment with it. So any way that you prefer. Ette?
I would like to ask a question about the presentations. I don't think I got it clearly. Like,
yeah, I mean, of course, I'm going to talk about that. I was thinking that we might do it at the end, but I don't know. Doesn't matter. Yeah, let's leave it to the end. I think those more technical parts, because then we are going to talk about grading and all that. Okay. So just we don't miss the flow of the act, because I think those things are also, you're going to be able to think about them better after the introduction of the actual themes, right? So I'm going to try to share my screen. Can you see the slide?
Yes.
So, why doesn't it move? Okay. So this is the first session. It's titled Engineers and Bricoleurs. And these are the parts of the slide. The most important division, models and examples, the Bricoleur engineer continuum, model of and model for, and finally geobricolage. I hope this is going to be really quick. I just wanted to be able to work closely with the text in this particular part. I'm trying to make, this get out of, so this is a quotation from Nick Cernicek and Alex Williams' Manifesto for Accelerationist Politics, which you might know from the hashtag accelerate book that has many accelerationist texts and is probably one of the basic bibliographical pillars for anything to do with the New Center. Many of the people there have taught here, including Cernicek. So I wanted to start here because here this fundamental polarization between those two characters is introduced in a very clear way. So they say at this passage, we believe the most important division in today's left is between those that hold the folk politics of localism, direct action, and relentless horizontalism, and those that outline what must become called an accelerationist politics at ease with a modernity of abstraction, complexity, globality, and technology. Folk politics remains content with establishing small and temporary spaces of non-capitalist social relations, eschewing the real problems entailed in facing foes which are intrinsically non-local, abstract, and rooted deep in our everyday infrastructure. The failure of such politics has been built in from the very beginning. By contrast, an accelerationist politics seeks to preserve the gains of late capitalism while going further than its value system, governance structures, and mass pathologies will allow. So here you see that, of course, this is a partisan description of this bipolar structure. Their antagonist here is not that clearly perspectivist. It might be understood as a more traditional version of, anarchistic, autonomistic, or maybe identity-based kind of localist leftist politics, okay? But in any case, in their book, The Ends of the World, Eduardo Viveiros de Castro and Deborah Donofsky sort of take the pains, I don't think this expression means the same in English as in Portuguese. In Portuguese, it means that you feel hurt by this, even though it's not necessarily directed to you. They put themselves in the position of the local politics that they call, folk politics. But they fundamentally agree. So they say, for us, we also take the diagnosis to be roughly accurate. That is indeed the most important fracture in the left. Notice the scare quotes today. To be sure, what we do not agree with at all is the obvious preference displayed in this paragraph and developed throughout the manifesto, according to which the first option, what is dismissively described as folk politics, is retrograde and preservationist, whereas the second option would be the only one capable of leading us into the post-industrial promised land. So you see that both sides are kind of very dismissive of each other. It seems to us, they continue, that it is precisely this accelerationist politics, explicitly inspired by the Eurocentric eschatology of progress, that is nostalgic of a rationalist, imperialist, triumphalist past. What the last must reconnect to is the roots in the Enlightenment, and the persistence of its faith in the liberating virtues of automation and technical progress is only possible on the condition of a glaring blind spot bang in the middle of its futurological vision, the intrusion of Gaia, no less. Intrusion of Gaia is an expression, I think, coined by Isabel Stenges that refers to, climate change and the Anthropocene. So you see that, the dialogue between those two cosmopolitical alignments doesn't start necessarily in such a friendly manner. And not that generous either. I think it's very clear to anyone familiar with either of those two movements, that the appraisal that the others have of them is not particularly generous. So then moving on, quite some years later, in this article on models and examples, Viveiros de Castro returns to this discussion, introducing those characters of the Bricoleur and the engineer. So he writes, I will sketch a few notes on the subtle but profound difference between the notions of model and example, making a distinction between these forms of world making or world thinking or world living. So making this distinction between those forms of world making has geopolitical and anthropological diacritical relevance, because it allows us to gauge alternative ways to confront the Anthropocene. And then he does that in a way to critique geoengineering. So the engineer is there because it's going to be an avatar of the geoengineering approach to the Anthropocene. And then what he calls critically, a good Anthropocene. The coming of a good Anthropocene is touted by eco-capitalist thinkers like those in the Breakthrough Institute or their singularitarian fellow travelers in the Silicon Valley, and is more or less directly implied by their left-wing accelerationist European counterparts. I think of Sunichek and Williams, because as we know, not all accelerationists, left accelerationists are European. It relies on the implementation of large-scale geoengineering projects as key to the continuous expansion, given the new normal, which is to say ever-worsening climate conditions, of the hegemonic social and bioengineering activity intrinsic to the modernist practice of generalized domestication. So again, not a very friendly view of the Promethean geoengineers. So to unpack a little bit the distinction between the models and examples, bricoleurs and engineers, the general import of the distinction consists in the difference between a mode of creativity that relies on already available heterogeneous materials, like the encyclopedic knowledge stored in the myth-maker's culture and language, not originally designed with the Bricoleurs' contingent project in view, and, on the other hand, one that starts with a project, devises a conceptual blueprint, and orders cut-to-measure equipment and elaborate specific materials to accomplish the engineer's project. In short, the bricoleur is inspired by former examples of the kind of work she or he is engaged in, while the engineer follows a model of his or her own design. Now, what is most interesting for me as a starting point for our investigation here, in that article is this part, where Viveiros de Castro sort of modulates his position a little bit. So he writes, "Let us not simplify the contrast, much less vilify the engineer. Nothing could be farther from Levi-Strauss's mind than a disparaging view of the natural and or mathematical sciences as such, to which he has repeatedly referred with admiration. He has a far less sanguine, he was far less sanguine about modern technological civilization. And if there ever was an anthropologist fond of model making, it was the father of structuralism." I should say here that Viveiros de Castro is very much a Levi-Straussian, so he does a sort of reinterpretation of Levi-Strauss that takes him more to the Bricoleurs side, because it is a post-structuralist reading, so a Deleuzian reading of Levi-Strauss, basically. So it takes it less, a little bit less focus on the structure and more focus on the informal dimension. But nevertheless, for him to dismiss Levi-Strauss would not be at all an option. So he said the distinction cannot be but relative, lying along a continuum rather than being a strict dichotomy. So this, as you can see, is the inception of our whole problem that is going to structure our research here. So how to not vilify the engineer, how to think of Bricoleur engineer as a continuum rather than a strict dichotomy, which is to say also, model and example as laying on a continuum instead of being a strict dichotomy. And he unpacks that a little bit. So for in the sense of, because the only pure engineer, the only engineer in a pure absolute sense would be God, in whom concept, model, and material implementation coincide immediately. When God says the word creates the thing immediately, right? Human engineers must make do with ideas and materials at hand, and therefore are bricoleurs, particularly when they leave the worldview of models and try to make things work in the phenomenal world. This can be observed especially in, Bruno Latour's work or science and technology studies in a broader sense, which show precisely how the scientist engineer, even though he might appear as a finished product, in this image of the engineer, the everyday, laboratory life kind of scientist is very much a bricoleur. It has to be a very good bricoleur if he wants to produce any good science. We can also think of Thomas Kuhn's idea of paradigms and paradigm shifts and revolutionary science, in the sense precisely that, a paradigm is another word for an example. So in as much as doing science is following examples and doing revolutionary science is finding, a new example, there is a very important work of bricolage, especially when you're going to need to do revolutionary science. And reciprocally, continuing the quote, reciprocally, every grassroots bricoleur calculates, anticipates results, and modifies the state of the world according to a certain intention. That is a model. She or he is, after all, a scientist of the concrete, which is the title of Levi-Strauss's chapter in the beginning of Wild Thought, where he introduces these two characters. You might have seen also in the syllabus that this was one of the other texts that was part of the bibliography for this session. The other one is by Bruno Latour, where Latour introduces these characters of the Terrans or the Earthbound, depending on how you translate, and the humans, which we are going to interpret here as the Inhumans or the Prometheus, and which Deborah Danowski and Viveiros de Castro take and also work with in this The Ends of the World book. So continuing on this same text by Viveiros de Castro, he then introduces this distinction between model of and model for, and this is where I would like to diverge with him here, so as to resolve the problem that was just established in a different way throughout our seminar. Because, you know, he says, let us distinguish very clearly between a notion of model as a normative versus model as a heuristic or scientific construct, between a model for and a model of. In this normative sense, a model is above all a political instrument involving an asymmetric power relation which maximizes the distance between the modeling authority and the subjects, human and non-human peoples, landscapes, the atmosphere that are to be modeled. So you can see that, you know, he introduces the distinction and he says that from there on, whenever he says model, he's going to be talking about models for. He has no problem with model of. His problem is with model for. I don't find that solution convincing and particularly interesting. I think it's, you know, we can discuss it further going forward, but I feel that basing this solution in a way to the problem on the distinction between the normative and the causal, or between the natural and the human sciences, would be not very strong move from a perspectivist perspective, where precisely you would not be able to rely in advance on that distinction. I think it's very hard to say that, and even counterintuitive, to save the scientific model by saying that it is, you know, purely scientific and not normative, while the other evil model is normative, and still you're going to be condemning the normative model, which is also something that I'm not fully convinced that we should do. And this is one of my interests in Prometheanism, you know, that they are somehow able to preserve some version of the possibility of using normative models, even if they have to be sort of played down in terms of their metaphysical assumptions. So I'm going to propose that we not necessarily take this. I mean, you might agree with the solution, but that we put this solution in question, so as to try to work around the problem in another way. But anyway, continuing a little bit here, so we get a little more information about how Viveiros de Castro understands this distinction between models and examples. Models are by definition simplifications of reality, but they can be used to understand it, models as heuristics, or be imposed upon it, models as norms, in order to browbeat reality, so to speak, into obeying them. In this latter sense, they have always lain behind or above the modernist project to flatten the many worlds of Gaian beings into a single global nomos. Examples, on the other hand, are ideas, techniques, institutions, and so on, that work as enticements to do something differently alike. The inspiring example, which is itself always a version of or a transformation of yet another example, just as myths are but versions of one another with no original model or template. So you can see that here you have a very interesting picture of example thinking, mythical thinking as example thinking, but not necessarily a very generous or interesting version of model making. Examples are borrowed horizontally, they diffuse, while models are imposed vertically, they emanate. Models give orders and enforce order, examples give cues inspiring inventions and subversions. The model of the model is being, while the example lies within the remit of doing. If the first is congenitally idealist and rationalist, the second is pragmatist and empiricist. So here's a lot of, associations that we can start from, and then we can, see if we agree with them, and to which extent we can add some nuance to this very radical distinction. But to conclude, this is the last slide. He introduces this concept of geobricolage. He says, human and non-human world makings have always been geobricolages, insofar as they have always taken from the earth the materials of all shades of materiality necessary for assuring their livability. One of the best examples for him of a positive combination of direct and semi-direct large-scale eco-bricolage is the present composition of the Amazonian rainforest biome, which is largely of so-called anthropogenic origin. All of the examples, and they are precisely always examples and not models, of geobricolage that he offers are of this kind of local, ecological, non-modern, very, very clearly so, practices, which I think is something we can examine, because I think part of the purchase of the interest of this concept of geobricolage that he himself introduces is that it doesn't necessarily, I think, have just one type of practice that it applies to. I think the idea of the bricolage engineering spectrum suggests that we might think even of characteristically, Promethean or engineer-like technologies in terms of the fact that they will never be really just purely Promethean engineering model-based technologies. They will always include some degree of bricolage, and they can even be approached in ways that are more tendent towards the Bricoleur side of the spectrum. So you can think of geoengineering itself in terms of geobricolage, which is to say, we can picture these kind of interventions done in the climate as bricolage, not in the sense of saying that they are going to be good because of that, possibly quite the opposite. The idea that the projects that we have in terms of geobricolage today are this kind of very cut to measure model, I think is very questionable. It's something that is conceived and projected in very precarious terms. So I think it does actually lend itself to an interpretation in terms of bricolage actually better than in an interpretation that would think that it could work as a model that you're going to impose on the earth, which is a very dangerous kind of idea, I think. On the other hand, you might also think that in the small scales, as he himself said, there is some role to be played by certain degrees of model making. So that would be the general posing of the problem in terms of that text. Okay. So how are we? Do we have other questions or comments? As I said, let's not try to take that much time with questions and comments today, because we still need a lot of time for your presentations. Okay, so we are about 1 hour and 10 minutes in, or something like that, right? I think I can go on a little bit more with my notes before we pass on to everyone's introductions. I hope you already know what you're going to say. So given what we've seen here in the discussion and up to this point, and again, these are very caricatural versions or examples of those conceptual characters at this point. But I would say that perhaps if we imagine a radically Terran perspective, it might amount to saying that if the modern worldview and form of life have created the problem, problem of technological acceleration caused climate deterioration, if that is what has created the problem to begin with, then it would be crazy to suppose that the solution to that would be just more modernity, right? So consequently, perspectivists or Terrans tend to see themes like geoengineering or high expectations deposited on artificial intelligence as these ideologically modernist tech fixes. The idea of tech fixes immediately applied to all of those possibilities. And that will only deepen ecological destruction and colonialist forms of governance, right? On the other hand, if you think also of this, caricatural, pure form of Prometheanists, if you take a position that is more reactive in relation to this kind of anarchistic, decolonial, and or ecological dismissal of modernity, that often tends to just affirm everything related to Enlightenment ideals, and then coloniality and extractivism will appear as bugs instead of features of this modern project, which may still be updated to revert those historical accidents. For the perspectivists, on the other hand, they would be features and not bugs, right? So there's different interpretations of the relation between the reality of, let's say, late capitalism and the conceptual infrastructure of modernity, right? So to put it in very simple terms, we might try to define the potentials and problems of both sides. Okay, I wanted to do this to kind of structure the discussion from here on. So the Terrans offer, of course, an important analysis of how certain deeply structural, putatively essential elements of modernity may be still involved in contemporary approaches to climate change. And they also offer heuristics for connecting to other ways of thinking and existing that avoid such elements. We're going to see that in more detail when we read Viveiros de Castro's work on metaphysical perspectivism. They also, as I mentioned, offer interpretations of modern science and technology that subtract the modernist metaphysical assumptions that are often associated with them. So that's the sense in which I say, if you think of works of people like Latour and Stengers, you can perfectly have an interpretation of any kind of technology, from the most planetary scale to the most localist and bricolage type of technology, that is sort of a Bricoleur interpretation of that, that subtracts it from this idea, this modernist idea of mastery and all of that is being criticized. So the potential downside, perhaps, of Terrans is that they often seem to end up too negative, in the sense of not offering any prospect of any prospect other than that of catastrophe. Viveiros de Castro often alludes to this idea that indigenous American peoples are already living after the end of their worlds. So we may conclude that actually those who really have a world to lose are the moderns themselves. It is they who are going to learn to live like indigenous people again after civilization collapses, and that's going to, serve them well. Frack around and find out. That, has some rhetorical power, but also it is actually coherent with the perspectivist Terran approach, in the sense that, the very idea of looking at the Anthropocene as a problem to which we should find a solution. So the idea of having a project, a plan, a promise, or a future are notions that Terrans are suspicious about, and they have good arguments in that sense. For them, the primacy of action over passivity, of linear historical time over either, mythical time, nonlinear time, or prioritizing space over time, which is also an interesting theme that we might get to. They are all part, of what got us here to begin with. So, of course, they are going to try to avoid this kind of trope of trying to offer a solution. So if they don't offer a solution, it's also, part of the whole point. And on the side, I already talked about some limits that I see in this Terran perspective. So I'm going to jump over some stuff here. And in terms of Prometheans, again, as I said, the positive side is that they do offer accounts of normative model making that are largely preoccupied precisely with distancing themselves from these kind of strong metaphysical underpinnings that are being criticized, for example, in the passages that we read. They offer a functionalist, fallibilist account of how normative model making can actually be made to function in practical contexts. So they do work to separate this kind of practical possibility from any essentialist humanist commitments that is like part of the whole point. So I think there in the next session, especially, we can look for this stronger version of the engineer, or of what is often called simply the humans as opposed to the Terrans. Instead of humans, we might think about Reza Negarestani's concept of the inhuman as being this, non-essentialist version of modernity that is, and also, less conservative and more oriented towards a radically leftist or emancipatory or, politically radical direction, right? But still, even in that version, I think there are downsides also that in part are expressed by the perspectivist critiques. And that includes, not only the fact that they often don't take that much work to engage with this particular adversary, in the sense that they are more often in opposition to another character that we haven't introduced here, which is the so-called libidinal materialists, right? The Inhumans or Prometheans have sort of appeared in the process of differentiating and opposing these libidinal materialists, as well as those, folk politicians, or the other character that is close to the folk politician, which is Reza's kitsch Marxist, right? They haven't engaged that much, or at least not that generously, in my opinion, with this other alternative tradition. And also, I think even if we take into account not that much their explicit philosophical commitments, but if we focus more on the accompanying aesthetic or mythology that is expressed, for example, in their style and tone, there's a certain epic tone that is common to Prometheanism, we may also find interesting points of tension to try to think about. In any case, I think the worst versions of both of those positions tend to be their most reactive points, when they are defining themselves in ways that are reactive in relation to what they see as the opposite position. So what I would like to explore is that I think there are more interesting and nuanced versions of both sides if we try to be more characterable and also try to break down this very solid opposition that we see in these kind of initial versions of the conversation. And to close and go to our to your presentations, if it hadn't become clear enough, I want to make my initial position clear. So in a way, I'm doing what I expect you to do also in your presentation. So I tend to understand my position, like at this point, as having, as I said, a metaphysical and cosmopolitical alignment with perspectivism on a very fundamental level, but also a tendency to follow Prometheanism in terms of many concrete and practical engagements that would normally be outside of the scope of perspectivists of Terrence. So I tend to be, eager to incorporate various Promethean themes and conceptual tools, as much, in as much as I'm able to untangle them from some basic assumptions that I don't necessarily want to commit to. Now you may have all other kinds of commitments and alignments, so I don't want to make this seminar about finding a position that is adequate to me, but rather, trying to draw a good map of what is at stake between the various possible configurations of all these problems. My way of thinking about this, to close, is itself based on what I understand as an ecological conception of politics. I think that an ecological conception of politics implies that there is no single answer to be looked for to the famous Leninist question, what to do. That answer would presuppose that we all should be doing the same thing, or, more charitably, that the differences between our actions might be accounted for or organized according to a project model or a meta theoretical framework for the whole, political conjuncture. And in contrast to that, I think political ecology implies that while we have no final map of the general situation, it's good that we have different collectives doing radically different things, even apparently conflicting and incompatible things, because that will tend to enhance the ensemble's resilience in contact with radical contingency. So given that we are facing such complex situations that we are objectively, practically unable to fully model, I think a consequence of that is this idea that it's not a very good approach to try to start by trying to decide whether everyone should be Bricoleur or everyone should be an engineer, whether everyone should be a localist or a Terran, or everyone should do this kind of accelerationist politics. Maybe there are, strategic, tactical instances where those things can be combined and become useful in all kinds of different ways, and it might be good for the general ecology of movements that share certain common objectives, which is very often the case. After all, even between those different political alignments, it might be better. It might be well advised, to maintain those kind of different things going, and then to let the process tell us whether we should move more to one direction or to the other direction, right? I mean, I hope it doesn't sound like I'm sort of establishing a kind of final conclusion here. This is more like, general sketch of how this is going to go. I haven't structured this, as you've noticed, in terms of the order of the next sections, though that's something that I think I expected to do in this first session. But if you have the program there, you're going to see that it's fairly simple to map what I've said here onto the different sessions. So basically, next week we're going to introduce the Promethean case for geoengineering. So we're going to read Ray Bracier's Prometheanism and its critics, and we're going to try, on the basis of some different key positions within this broad idea of Prometheanism, to get a more interesting, more nuanced, more powerful version of this conceptual character of the Promethean, or of the engineer, and how that character does world making and relates to this idea of geoengineering. Then we're going to focus on the perspectivist side and try to understand what that position actually amounts to. In this session, we were more focused on the general problem. I don't think there's elements here yet to really understand any particular author's position really is in terms of perspectivism. So I hope that in that session, we're going to be able to do that. And then we are going to start already to introduce this concept of the diagram, which already plays an important role in Viveiros de Castro's work, though he doesn't use that term, leading up to the final session, where we're going to try to finally really use this concept of the diagram to mediate between what we have presented as those two contrasting positions. So we're going to read a chapter of Deleuze's book on Foucault, where he develops very centrally this idea of the diagram, which he actually gets, among other places, but very literally gets from Surveiller et Punir. And then also discuss a little bit of Patricia Reed's version of a moderate version of Prometheanism. So very, very straightforward kind of dialectical structure, even though the idea, as I said, is not, at least for me, to try to find a synthesis. Perhaps that's also a possibility, to think of this in terms of a dialectical synthesis. I don't tend to necessarily think in that way. I would rather think of it in terms of a heuristic. So yeah, should I talk about the like technical and grading stuff before the presentations, maybe, or afterwards? Before, okay. So basically, you have to do three things, I think. Participating here, presenting on some of the text, or on one of the texts, and then doing a final paper, right? The paper is supposed to be 1,000 words, so very short. It's not an academic paper. It's just an expression of your ideas, something that you perhaps want to do in your own projects that has to do with the seminar in one way or another. And I encourage you to do it either in a more philosophical way, or, as I said, if you want to do some more artistic kind of theory fictional picture, just of of some narrative or some way of imagining the different configurations of these conceptual characters that we're talking about, that's also a possibility. So whatever you want to give me, so that I can give you feedback on that is useful to you and that has to do with what we are discussing here, basically. As for your presentations, we are going to establish, I don't know exactly how, but some way for you to pick, the texts that you want to present. If we actually have as many people as we seem to have presenting, we're going to have more than one person per text, so you can make groups. And as I said before, the ones presenting live should be the ones presenting the main text for each session should be presenting live, and the others should record a video, and we'll see, like, we can talk. I don't know technically how you're going to get that video to me, but it should be made available somehow. Okay, so I guess that's it. Is there any other more technical procedural question that you have that we should go through? Okay, so sorry, was I muted for a long time? I don't know why I was muted here. Or did I just mute myself now? Okay, so should we move on to to your introductions before we finish? I think we have like half an hour. No, we have sorry, how much time do we still have? We started 3:15, right? So I think we still have 1 hour, right? Okay, so yeah, I think that's perfect, right? Because I know that you guys are going to take a little more time than than you're going to try to take. So yeah, let's start. Do you want to go in whatever order, or I know that people usually call people by name, so we don't have that awkward silence between one person and the next. So okay, I'm going to just call you through the order that you appear here to me. So first would be Hermano. So again, as I said, please like introduce yourself through trying, if you feel comfortable, trying to answer this question, where you feel you would stand in this diagram between engineers and bricoleurs, perspectivists and Prometheanists, or Terrans and Inhumans. You don't have to be on one side or the other. You might say that you're somewhere in the middle, that you're tending a little bit towards one side, that you're, you know, a secret third thing, that you're a libidinal materialist, that you're a Landian, unconditional accelerationist, whatever. Just feel free to interpret this the way you prefer.
Thank you. So I'm Armando Napolitano. I'm an Italian Canadian studying at McGill. Then my doctoral dissertation is actually on the legal aspect of geoengineering from an ecological approach. And I would say, perhaps obviously I'm more on the perspectivist side, although I fully agree with that it seems that perspectivists have difficulties in then proposing concrete solutions on how to move forward, which is something that I'm also encountering in my thesis. Yet I think that being on this side is very useful to build critique on the opposite view. So the Promethean, let's say, approach. And just today I was reading Clive Hamilton's book on geoengineering for checking some citation, and I realized how actually I think is a Promethean that pretends to be a perspectivist, and I liked the Hamilton's approach that says we need to abandon this paradigm of anthropocentrism by being more anthropocentric than before, because only through that we can kind of find the right approach to respect the ecological balance and use all the humans' power to kind of stay within the ecological boundaries. So somehow acknowledging our power to also acknowledge the huge amount of responsibility. And so I think this kind of perspective, you know, I just draw a kind of diagram with the two pole at the opposite, and I think this perspective could be useful kind of to move between the two. Yes, I also love the quote out there that say the Smith is a terrain. So I'm curious to see later in the course how this is how this would unfold. And yeah, so that's basically me. Thank you.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Next up, I have Caroline Gore.
Hi. Hello, my name's Caroline Gore. I graduated last year from MA of Philosophy at the University of Liverpool and scored terribly. So now I'm bumming around outside academia begging for papers. I write about video games and philosophy, but not just in a nicey veins way, but in the same way like Jameson uses architecture or film for the loose, actually treating it as a medium. And the reading this week absolutely cursed my entire being, because I recently wrote a paper against someone else's paper who was a very Landian, fishery, unconditional accelerationist, you know, drill into the earth, complete pessimist about the human race. And I absolutely couldn't stand it. And I wrote about a different genealogy of games and how they show what would be called here a very Terran perspectivist, and even makes a sort of joke about the like humans have a world to lose, not the people in the game that has a very, very horrific world they actually live in. And it's cursed me. But in general, I think I'm more of an Arcadian, if that's how you pronounce it, because I really, really liked EVC's writing, but I disagree really, really heavy on how both him and Levi-Strauss talk about the about myth. I've always and ritual. I've always been a really big Huizinga fan when it comes to ritual and culture, and think that the biggest issue in modern society is that we have inverted the way the ritual, with the bricolage rituals of just playing around, that's supposed to generate religion, then culture, is now coming from top down, which is exactly what EVC calls the model 4, the verticality, the pushing down. So I think I would probably be like an Acadian, but with a little bit more of the Prometheanism optimism. And I also do think EVC is kind of bad with his ontological anarchism, but I've always been closer to the I have never had to say his name out loud, and Stringer's sort of chaos theory, closer to Bloom, Palumbo, and the sort of fractal nature. So less a Mobius strip, more of a interconnected weaving fractal, and that's a better way of relationalism than having this very distinguished way of just this bad, this good, this bad, this good. But yeah, my background was also in law, and then I gave law up to do philosophy. And every day my parents tell me that I should have stayed in law. All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I sort of did that while continuing in law, right? So I'm still basically living a philosopher's life. So next up, I have Arnab Chakraborty.
Thank you, Jose. I'm from Kolkata, as well, like Calcutta in India, and I had my first formal academic background in English studies, like that is mostly literature, and my my bachelor's and master's were in English, and is related theoretical and philosophical aspects. After a while, in the private sector as a writer, I returned to academics and like completed some coursework from a couple from a couple of universities, like PhD coursework and MPhil coursework, and I joined GCS as a second master's student in philosophy, and the postgraduate certificate in transdisciplinary studies, like at the New Center. So as a my research at GCS deals mostly with individuation, the philosophy of technology, and also how media archaeology as part of technological apparatuses and like as part of technological apparatuses and assemblages could provide a sort of excavation of the of how the individual has been like conditioned or individuated through both media and its technological like correlates. So like that's for my MA, but like at the New Center, I have not yet decided my final project, but in the spectrum or continuum of perspectivism and Prometheanism, I am like by my disciplinary background, I should be it's presupposed that I should be a perspectivist, but I am not a strict perspectivist, but because albeit the hard Manichaean polarities that are posited like between the two categories, I think mediation at the interfaces, as Jose you were talking about, that we need to find more interfaces where such mediation can occur, where the bricoleur and the engineer can strategically morph into one and the other. And this, I think, can only come about when Prometheanism actually adopts a more expanded version of space and time, which I think are compressed by the enframings and the models that Prometheanism uses on reality, or imposes on reality. Like this has been a feature since like early colonialism to neo-extractivism, that space and time has been brutally appropriated along with the entire biosphere. So a more expanded version of space and time and the living beings, from plants to creatures, all of it, a more nuanced and expanded version of the Promethean project could actually bring us closer to an interaction between the human and the non-human worlds. I think an interface that can really be productive here, productive not in the positivist sense, but productive in the sense of taking things forward like sustainably. I think is the question of consciousness, because and consciousness as it is related to the philosophy of panpsychism and animist philosophies and worldviews can actually expand indigenous animist worldviews, and even advanced philosophies of panpsychism can help us to understand the both the biosphere and the vibrant lives of things, as Jane Bennett has so eloquently placed it. So so I'm looking for this interface like any of you. So so thank you. So that will be me.
Thank you. Next up, I have Gabriel Guarino.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gabriel Guarino. I'm really happy to be here to meet you all, to see some faces again from the last seminar we've been through, and to see José Antonio again. I'm from Brazil, from Rio de Janeiro. I'm actually based in São Paulo now. I am a martial artist and anthropologist, and I'm studying a postdoctorate research on memory and creation in Chinese martial arts, getting together an approach on anthropology of techniques and Chinese philosophy of Tao Shui, which we used to call neo-Confucianism here in the outside China, let's say. And most of what I'm doing in terms of research and practice as an artist and as an athlete of Kung Fu and everything else relies on this capacity of transformation of the body and creation of worlds, let's say, through education of the senses. And I teach queer self-defense in Brazil, and based on two styles of Chinese martial arts, which is Tai Chi Chuan, the Tai Chi Chuan, and Eagle Claw Kung Fu. And to answer the question, and I find myself actually very strong committed to perspectivism, both from my background as an anthropologist, and also because I grew up on this Chinese analogism. So let's say that I feel like somehow I discovered myself very recently on this pole, let's say, of this junction, and through getting contact with the work of José and New Center, so on, that I've been learning more about, let's say, Prometheanism and accelerationism, which were words that I never heard about on my research formation in anthropology and Chinese philosophy. So I just found myself as in that side of the topic.
Thanks, Gabriel. Isabella Ojeda, I don't know how to pronounce it.
Hello, everyone. So I am also from Brazil, but I live in Paris now. I am a visual artist. I like to research how to create my own material supply, DIY techniques. And it was funny, I was reading the text today, and I really got me thinking about my practice, because I come from painting practice, and I'm trying to locate different approaches to this practice, the way that I do it, trying to see under which category they befall. And it's an interesting thing, because it's methods of creation. Let's say, to give an example, you can either do a painting from observation, or you can do it, let's say, tracing with a projector. So I'm saying, I was thinking, okay, maybe so then a bricoleur, he would do it from the observation, and maybe an engineer would come in contact with the projector and create this model and then go from there. And it's a problem, because I've always very much being in line with perspectivism in my work since a long time. And the past few years, I've been learning that this modellaic approach has really been also really helpful to be able to condense some materiality and just put some order in my creative process in a way. So I'm finding myself in the middle of the continuum, appreciating engineering was something that I wouldn't expect. And because I've been always working with Viveiros de Castro more, and identifying as an animist. And also I live in Europe since 5 years, and also it's also been coming in contact with this way of doing here that is also very much, I would say, in the way that I've come in contact in the school, that was a decorative art school, so it's very engineering based. And so it's like I bring my chaos in contact with this different approach, which is a very difficult, frustrating process of assimilation or not. And so it's interesting that I don't know how to answer. I'm a little bit here and there right now, so in this transition moment.
Yeah, thanks. That's very interesting. One thing that caught my attention in Levi-Strauss's chapter where he talks about the engineers in Bricoleurs, since now I was thinking about this, the fact that the New Center has so many artists and that Luisa isn't going to be here. He mentions at some point that art would be sort of in the middle between the engineer and the bricolayer. I don't know exactly what he means by that, but maybe that's something that we might think about.
Yes, I think I feel it too.
Yeah, cool. Next, Joshua Guinness.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the introduction. It was super interesting already. Very excited. So my name's Joshua. I'm an architect and I'm based in Zurich, Switzerland. I'm from Germany originally. And as an architect, I'm a member of a collective and we work in, projects from architecture through to like larger scale urban transformation, focusing mostly on kind of reorienting spatial planning processes towards being more open-ended, I would say, and more holistic. But at the same time, I also teach at the ETH speculative design, I would say, more or less, within the realm of architectural education. And then I'm also in the process of kind of establishing my own practice where I'm trying to apply spatial thinking more to like other ends outside of architecture. So yeah, to things from platform design to strategies for culture, to ecology and so on. And so I'm also becoming more and more interested in sort of decentralized and repeatable spatial forms beyond, let's say, the site-specific. So yeah, for example, like products and protocols, things that could be extrapolated from the local context. That's where I see a connection to the seminar very much. So yeah, in terms of the question, I spontaneously I would say that while I am sympathetic to the perspectivist outlook, I'm leaning towards Prometheanism, also because I've been reading a lot of the authors that you mentioned in that sort of tendency. And it's also due to my observations of my own environment, kind of my own disciplinary environment in architecture, where I feel that there's a kind of a leaning towards the local, as I said before, the site specific, maybe the perspectivist, if you want to call it that. So yeah, there's this opposition between localism and universalism, kind of more or less, if you want to simplify it a bit. And I often feel that there's an apprehension towards anything that's normative, planned, or anything that approaches governance. And I feel that apprehension kind of almost it's justified to a certain extent, but it also puts us as designers in a point where we're detached from politics. And I'd like to kind of bridge that. So yeah, I think that's more or less what I was going to say. So I'm interested in learning also from the expanded sort of horizons of perspectivism, and I feel like it has a lot to give. But I'm just not sure that I would kind of I would still want to integrate that knowledge into some models and some at least provisional models to act on the world, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, makes total sense. That's precisely the kind of thing that I think is connected to these questions. You know, the fact that you can have something that is, you know, modular in the sense that where exactly is that between, you know, you can think of if you do something once and then you try to do another one like based on that, but doing adjustments because you're going to be implementing it somewhere else. There's going to be a dimension of bricolage to that. You know, it's only going to be a pure model if you just, you know, take a pre-established form and you're just like you're playing SimCity or something like that. You're just like dropping them on different territories. But as long as you have some kind of adaptation, you're already working at the realm of the example. But at the same time, when, as I said, like we see in a lot of places, there's a kind of righteous pathos about trying to renounce any intention of reproducibility or normativity, which might make you be so radically tied to the pure example that you can't even draw from it and transpose it somewhere else, because that's already going to have even a little bit of a model attitude if you do that. So you end up stuck in one place, right? So the possibility of I think you give a pretty good example precisely of a kind of situation in which these kinds of questions appear. Next, Savi, do you want to also introduce yourself?
Well, I'm more perspectives, but I have such problems with some conservative thinkings, and I think it seems to be the core of the perspectivism, some conservative thinking, and I disagree absolutely with it. But I'm also like some accelerationist thinking, so I'm kind of in the middle. I think I like your thoughts and Helan's ones, because you two can tries to find a way more peaceful way between the two thinkings. So I'm more or less in the same way. That's it. I need to to read the Gerina Rajno chat. I think you you didn't see the chat. She's without the mic.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I can read it too, but I don't see it. I think probably she sent it just to you. Yeah, you can read it.
I can read.
Yeah. Oh no, it's here. Okay. So I'll read it. Don't worry. So I have just come back from taking classes at New Center after an absence. So I will be trying to reconfigure some of my ideas, but I am essentially a Promethean engineer in my worldview, but very, very interested in bricolage. I find that coming to the world with an intention, so starting with a model, I have a blind spot and am less present to the present and to action or doing. So I'm interested in exploring more of the bricolage side of things. Yeah, very cool. Okay, next up I have Ananya Panda.
Hi, I'm Ananya from India and currently based in the Netherlands. I'm a mixed media artist and graphic designer. And I completed my master in Den Bosch at the Master Institute of Visual Cultures in situated design, which is very much about design after the situated turn, which is why I think I align more with the perspectivism. Although I see that the world is constructed in a Promethean gaze. What else to say? In my work, I research human labor that goes into the making of artificial intelligence and exploring narratives and representations of artificial intelligence outside the hegemonic or techno-solutionist viewpoint. Thank you.
Yeah, so finally someone with a more radical position to one side, I think, which is cool. Otherwise, you're going to be everyone just stuck in the middle. So, Ete Monteiro.
Hi, everyone. Okay, let's just take my cat from here. Oh my god. Oh my god, I'm sorry. This was my cat that oh, okay. Hello everyone, my name is José. I am a graduate student of social sciences at PUC Rio. I to answer the question, I would say I am way more of a perspectivist, Darwin, earthbound. I don't know the exact name for this position. I think that this has a lot to do with the formation that I have in PUC EU. That is I tend to view it as a university that has a lot of research and practice work with ecological questions, maybe a relation to some materialism of Catholicism. I don't know. But philosophy, anthropology, even biology and chemistry are intertwined in PUC under these discussions of ecology, Anthropocene, and catastrophic times. I am very interested in gender studies, so I am located in this Terran perspectivist field, more linked to the new materialisms and feminist discussions of gender, sexuality, and a new way of perceiving nature, materiality, bodies, and technologies. So I am a great reader of Haraway. I'm also interested more recently in other new materialist feminists like Karen Borad or Rosie Braidotti. And I tend to kind of disagree with this accusation towards earthbound thinking that is that says that Terrans don't have a plan of action or don't have a way of doing politics. I think that the way we think cosmopolitics is inherently limiting towards a top-down and universal politics, which I tend to see that it is more the way that left accelerationists try to do politics, like try to bring back enlightenment and universality and top-down planning. And I think that okay, earthbounds don't have a clear global planning towards politics or trying to deal in a more direct way with climate change. But I think that the cosmopolitical proposition of the Belfingers is a way of doing politics, of always disaccelerating conclusions and trying to include other beings, ontologies, and modes of existence. I'm also very interested in the accelerationist slash Prometheanist thought, although I don't have so much of a political agreement with them. I think that I don't know, and I didn't read a lot of those texts, but I tend to almost to agree with the diagnosis made by Nick Land that we are rushing towards a obsolescence of the human and towards a acceleration of technology, and I wouldn't like to agree with him, but I think that he had a good point on the diagnosis. So I'm more interested in this field of Prometheanism by a diagnosis than a political proposition. But inside the field of Prometheanism, I think that I have a great affinity to xenofeminism, although I think that there are some limitations, or sometimes they feel like very technophilic in a almost Silicon Valley way that I don't really like. But I think that the concept of a feminism towards the strange, the otherness, the weird is very interesting to me. And yeah, I would say that I try to find it more interesting because I like this perspectivist field of discussion about science and technology studies, and I think that I became more interested in these discussions because I saw in STS a more at the same time a perspective that shows how science is constructed, but not in a critical way, as Latour would put it. Like, it's not to say that to say that it's constructed is not to say that it's false or arbitrary. And I really don't like this stereotypical postmodern relativism. So I think that I could find in this field of thought a vision of science that acknowledges the constructive side and sees it as a way towards objectivity, not a obstacle or a mask to objectivity. So yeah, I think that this is what I would like to say to introduce myself.
Thanks. Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's important to also start introducing, when we have more time in the next sessions, all those like internal differences also within the different tendencies that we've talked about, because you're going to have, for example, right, feminist versions, or versions of feminism tending towards the different sides also, right? You can have very different and sometimes apparently at least diverging ideas of feminism, which sort of tend to also map onto more or less a bigger interest in a more radical second wave, or in more gender-based third wave feminism, that tends to enter into dialogue with those different questions. You're going to also have that in relation to all kinds of more specific discussions, and you can try to, I think one thing that we can try to do is to map all of those things. We can even try to, create some kind of document where we can start, putting things. We can, talk on Discord and see what kind of media we can use for that, but we can try to start mapping out all of the different possibilities and using that as a way to enter into these dialogues. Like, for example, you mentioned the new materialisms and Donna Haraway, and those are figures that sometimes are hard to pin down. Donna Haraway is very influential for xenofeminism, which is clearly Prometheanist, even though it might be, kind of more moderate than, I don't know, Benjamin Bratton. But at the same time, she has clearly, especially in her later work with Staying with the Trouble and stuff like that, gone very much to Terran, earthbound direction. So you can even try to trace those transitions in the trajectories of different authors or different movements. New materialism sometimes feels like it would be close to like libidinal materialism, which tends to be associated with classical accelerationism, but it has also a lot in common with cosmopolitical Terran approaches. So yeah, there's a lot of questions to try to answer. Let's see, do we have other Pichaya Supavanij, if I've got that right?
Yeah. Yes. Thanks, Jose. Hi, everyone. My name is Pichaya. I'm a curator based in Bangkok, Thailand. My background is in museum planning and design. I've worked in the US maybe for over 10 years, working for in a museum design firm, working for different types of museums. Then I got another design degree in Italy for conceptual design, and then come back home for a curatorial job. I'm not sure about the Prometheanism and perspectivism in terms of thinking tool that I could commit fully just yet, only because I don't know enough, and I don't know enough of the impact just yet to be able to say that I am this. I am, perspectivism or Prometheanism. But in terms of my worldview, I am perspectivism probably with natural tendency more than anything else. Same with Prometheanism, just a natural interest, natural tendency. My final project, I am thinking of one word. Well, it's a phrase, which is spectral infrastructure. Maybe it relates to the current research that I am working on for a long time. It's like I'm circling around trying to find a appropriate theoretical framework to do this. I'm interested in critical spatial literacy. And I feel this class addressed this quite head on. Same with the first class by Anna Longo. So I'm very excited to explore the class. And one thing is that I'm also interested in creative practice of knowledge, meaning that I'm very interested in applying theory into practice simultaneously. So sometimes I tend to do presentation in various forms, not necessary text. I just want to express that before. So thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, like totally, you can, anyone really, if you want to explore different forms for your presentation or for your final project, feel free to do that as long as it's something that is, more or less equivalent in some way to 1,000 word text, which is a pretty short text. So like if you don't do like a 2-hour movie or something like that, it's going to be totally fine.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I just remembered that I wanted to comment on something also that someone mentioned, Elon. I think it was, who was it? Anyway, and to clarify, that's not Elon Musk, that's Ilan Ben-Susan, who is a Brazilian Brazilian philosopher who's very interesting. He's not that well known because, the world is very unfair with philosophers who are working outside of the, main global north institutions, but he's published in the speculative realism series that's organized by Graham Harman. And he's very interesting in terms of producing something that in the last instance, I think is describable as a perspectivist metaphysics, but someone who is very generous in relation to his interest also in Prometheanism and accelerationism and all that. He has a debate with J.P. Cajon, who is an instructor here at the New Center, in which all of these things are unpacked in very interesting ways. I also wanted to mention Moisés Pinto Neto, who is also another Brazilian thinker that is working also, Elon has this idea of the cosmopolitical parties, which is one of the inspirations, behind this kind of heuristic also. And Moisés also is developing a theory of what he calls the 4 cosmograms, which dialogues a lot with this. He has like a political quadrant, like cosmopolitical quadrant that has Edenists, who would be the Prometheans, Indigenists, who would be the Terrans, and then he also has the Digitalists, who would be the classical Landian, or would include, the classical Landian accelerationists, as well as, anarcho-capitalists and all kinds of, crypto bros and stuff like that. And then also supremacism, which is like traditionalist kind of Terrans that would be, for example, Carl Schmitt or Alexander Dugin or all kinds of authoritarian earthbounds that don't fit into the indigenous camp because they have different relation to this earth. You know, their mythical earth is different, so he puts them in a different quadrant. So all of those stuff that we can use to kind of compose heuristics. I just wanted to acknowledge that because those are discussions that also influence me in thinking about these things. It's not Elon like in Elon Musk, it's Elon like with an H, Ben Suzanne. So like this Hilan, Ben Suzanne. And the other is Moisés Pinto Neto, like this. Yeah, so Sarush Sayedi.
Yes, thank you very much. It was a very interesting lecture. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's a bit muffled, but yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, my internet connection is very weak. Actually, a few years ago, I did my PhD in philosophy in Iran, and it was my dissertation was focused on Heidegger and the interpretations of Nietzsche's philosophy. So in that area, what I came upon was like maybe 12 different viewpoints regarding technology. One that would be called Heideggerian, which is like a decelerationist, maybe in some sense, which is a critique of technology, but at the same time, on the other hand, I worked in those who got me into some other thinkers. First of all, actually, I have one of the few thinkers who has like a very nice text on these two thinkers. So after that, I became interested in this, and then at the same time, I found
it's hard to understand most of what you say. Maybe it's better if you try to type it down and we read it, because yeah, there's a lot of parts like the names of authors where it's going to be hard to understand, I think, because it's really distorted. It's like you're plugged into like a distorted amplifier.
Okay, sure. Okay.
Sorry. Meanwhile, we have Johanna Robinson.
Hello. Sorry, I didn't realize it's so dark here. I'm a visual artist. I'll keep it fairly short because I'm fairly new to a lot of these terms. I'm doing the certificate in world making here at the New Center, partially because I wanted to articulate more of the ideas that I've been thinking about mostly in visual format. Mostly I'm a painter. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. I'm in Greece just through August for a couple weeks on an artist residency. Already in the session, I think I've realized some like dilemmas in my own work, because I tend to make visual art that I try to move away from an anthropocentric view, and I would think of myself as more of a perspectivist, but then like trying to make work from that view I see is already a problem, because I can only see it through my own perspective, and which isn't the perspective I'm trying to make the work from, if that makes sense. But anyways, thank you.
Thank you. Do you have anyone else other than Sarush while he's writing his introduction? Is anyone? Did I miss anyone? I don't think so, right? So basically, while we still have a couple minutes, and while Sarush is, I think, typing his introduction, do you have any other questions regarding how we are going to move forward, or what you should do in terms of grading and all that?
Irina had a question.
Oh, in the chat? Had a question. Are you able to say a little more about perspectivist metaphysics, as I'm not sure I can quite... Yeah, so I didn't try to really get into that yet, and it might be... I noticed at this point that it might probably be like, why are we calling this perspectivism? Because like Terran or Earthbound, like Terran is another translation of earthbound, because in Francis it would be terrain. So terra means like earth. Perspectivism, it's something that we are going to actually get into in the third session, where we're going to read Viveiros de Castro's work about it. It is basically his term for, at the same time, his anthropological work with indigenous people from Amazonia and elsewhere, where he describes their metaphysics as perspectivist. And we're going to get into that in the third session because it's kind of complicated, but it has to do with the idea that the places of nature and culture are not absolute, but rather are redistributed according to the perspective. So everyone, including the jaguar, including the Amazon forest, you know, every entity has a perspective in which potentially they themselves are people, and they see others as being animals or as being spirits. So the jaguar sees themselves as people and sees the human that they're going to eat as a prey animal, for example. So I didn't try to introduce that because I know that, like, upfront it sounds very weird to think, you know, what are the implications of that? But then Viveiros de Castro also sort of transposes that perspectivist metaphysics into his anthropology. So his anthropological method is also, in a way, perspectivist or perspectival. He talks about perspectival anthropology. And then perspectivism ends up also sort of penetrating philosophy or metaphysics in a very general sense. So you can talk about perspectivism as a position in metaphysics. And you have, for example, a volume that's titled comparative metaphysics, which is a sort of a statement by various authors of this kind of perspectivist position in metaphysics, which is also explored recently by Didier Debèze, who is working with Isabelle Stengers. So yeah, you have all of those layers, but they're also connected. We're going to have a lot more clarity of that in the third section. If you want to try to get an idea before that, you can just try to take a look at the texts for the third session, or maybe to some other more like introductory material that I can also try to share with you. So going back to the final introduction of Soroush Saidi, I'm going to read. I did my PhD dissertation a few years ago on Heidegger and Deleuze, during which time I got to know people like Brazier, Land, and others. My project ever since has had two sides. On one hand, focusing on post-humanism, accelerationism, inhumanism, and on the other hand, I focused on figures such as Agamben and Derrida. I tried to bring them closer together and go beyond the limitations of humanism as sovereignty that might haunt the post-humanist accelerationist projects. My question is how to go beyond the human without falling back into sovereignty, as Derrida on Agamben criticized it. Yeah, you're probably referring to The Beast in the Sovereign seminar, right, by Derrida, where he throws some very funny shade at Agamben. Then on the other hand, I try to bring all this into Iranian philosophy and rethink Iranian political theology from a post-humanist perspective. That's interesting. One thing that we probably should try to figure out from next session on is what is the purchase or the meaning, the implications of this metaphysical turn in Prometheanism that we see, even theological turn in Prometheanism that we see in some recent developments of Reza's philosophical and political and theological political orientations, and also other parts of Prometheanism. I think that's something that also shakes a little bit this initial diagram that we are drawing here. So we're about time we should finish. So I just wanted to say to remind you all that, you know, for next session we are going to have the assigned reading of Ray Bracier's essay Prometheanism and Its Critics, which is in the hashtag accelerationist reader. We also have Helen Hester's Xenofeminism book, first chapter, What is Xenofeminism? Benjamin Bratton's The Terraforming, also just a little part of that book. Again, what you have like the priority to read is Prometheanism and Its Critics. The other ones we're not going to necessarily be discussing it that deeply in class. They're sort of on the background. And whoever takes Prometheanism and Its Critics should be presenting on class. So if anyone wants to present that text, just try to, you know, reach out in whichever one of the different media that we have for communicating, and let me know that you want to present that one so that you can prepare in time and all that. The other ones don't necessarily have to have their presentation ready before the class, but I think it's also nice if we can have them also in time for the class, because then whoever else wants to, you know, get a general idea without necessarily having time to read the whole text, they can like use that material. So we're going to see how we're going to distribute those texts. So if there's some text that you really want, just really stay paying attention to the different channels of communication, so you can put your name on there in the text that you want before before everyone else. And also, yeah, you're going to have groups, because I think there's, I mean, I'm not sure, because we have like less people here actually. I don't know how many people like introduce themselves here, but we have 12 texts. So anyway, let's try to see, just like, let's try not to have like a bunch of people just presenting one text. So it's better if you only start to make larger groups in as much as it becomes necessary, because the texts are already taken, if possible. Like, don't go beyond like 2 people for the same text until we have actually all of the texts assigned to someone. Is there anything else we should address? Yeah, okay, so that's it then. I'm going to see you next week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.